Hello and welcome to Haunted Montreal's Spooky Story Sessions. I'm your host, Holly Rhiannon, and today I'm going to tell you all about Montreal's haunted Victorian-era ice castles. With over 450 documented ghost stories, Montreal is easily the most haunted city in Canada, if not all of North America. Haunted Montreal is dedicated to researching these paranormal tales, and on our channel we bring you new videos in both French and English every second Saturday. Today, we examine Montreal's haunted Victorian-era ice castles, continuing from our last episode discussing Victorian-era Christmas ghost storytelling. In the Victorian-era, Montrealers came up with some novel ways to overcome the hardships of winter. With all the misery, solutions were sought to soften the edges a bit. Victorian Montrealers had some amazing traditions that no longer exist, notably the city's famous winter carnivals. But before we get into today's story, please remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell button so you actually get notified every time we have a new tale to share. And hey, if you're already subscribed, thank you so much. Welcome back. I'm so happy to see you again. Now, without further ado, let's get spooky. The Victorian era began on June 20th, 1837, with the birth of baby Victoria into the British royal family. She would become the British Queen and oversee a colonial empire across the planet where the sun never set. During the Victorian era, there was a popular tradition of telling ghost stories during Christmas all across this empire, including in the city of Montreal. These spooky tales would reflect darker, ancient, and more fundamental issues than many of us are used to with Christmas stories these days, such as the winter solstice, death, rebirth, and the connection between a ghost storyteller and his or her audience. During winters of the 19th and early 20th century, Montrealers celebrated the retelling of these ghost stories with a hot glass of mulled brandy or wine by a warm, crackling fire in the hearth. The winter has always brought many hardships to Montreal. In the Victorian era, Montrealers came up with some novel ways to overcome these hardships. With all the misery and months of snow, solutions were sought to soften the hard edges of this season. Victorian Montrealers had some really interesting traditions that no longer exist, notably the city's famous winter carnivals, the first of which was held in 1883. Ghost stories were especially popular at the winter carnivals. Set in late January or early February, the events typically attracted 50,000 tourists to Montreal for winter sports and social gatherings. The streets were choked with thousands of sleighs, and parties and balls were held all over the city. There were also ice sculptures in Dominion Square, curling bonspiels on the frozen river, and a giant toboggan slide down Peel Street. Torch-bearing snowshoers would tramp up the summit of Mount Royal, creating an illusion of a fiery snake ascending the mountain. Winter sports were enormously popular: snowshoeing, curling, tobogganing, and the newly created game of hockey. Hockey was invented in 1885 in Montreal, and matches were played at the palatial Victoria Rink, which also hosted lavish skating parties. One of the major highlights of the Winter Carnival was the construction of massive ice castles in Dominion Square. These magnificent structures were lit up at night, and it was from here that colorful fireworks displays were launched to the awe of large crowds beneath the frosty night sky. The ice castles were also rumored to be haunted, on account of the fact that Dominion Square was established on the old St. Antoine Cholera Cemetery, which had closed in 1799 because it was full. With tens of thousands of corpses buried under Dominion Square, many stacked in burial trenches, rumors spread that the dead were unhappy with these celebrations taking place on their old cemetery. Because fireworks were stored in the ice castles, they had to be guarded for safety reasons. One night watchman was a fellow named Ambrose, who was half French and half Irish. Being superstitious, he suspected that the ice castles were haunted. Sometimes he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him when he spotted what appeared to be frozen humans within the ice after sundown. He also heard ghostly moaning sounds, which seemed to voice their disapproval of him being there. And he would hear the disembodied words, "Respect the dead," which seemed to echo through the icy corridors, courts, and ballrooms. He told his colleagues about these strange occurrences, and while they humored him, they did not really take his claims seriously. To keep himself sane, he brought along a flask of whiskey, a pipe, and a pouch of tobacco to calm the nerves during the long winter nights guarding the ice castles. During the climax of the Winter Carnival week, the Ice Palace was the site of a great battle between two armies of hundreds of snowshoers. One group defended the castle while the other attacked it. The defending soldiers would line the walls and prepare for the oncoming siege. As the battle began, fireworks would be launched from both armies and from the walls of the castle. The spectacular light show was described as a fairyland, with the fireworks and burning colored lights turning the sky into a rainbow hue that lasted half an hour. As the battle came to a close, the attacking army would overtake the palace and claim victory. With the battle over, both sides would then converge and begin a torchlit snowshoe ramble up Mount Royal. Once on the heights, they would release more fireworks over the city. When people returned to their homes or hotels, the fireplaces were stoked and piping hot mulled wine was prepared. Once everything was ready, people would gather around parlors across the city for a much-loved Victorian tradition, the telling of ghost stories. Unfortunately, the famous Montreal Winter Carnival was not to last. The fifth and last edition occurred in 1889. The final edition was successful at first. The same routine of winter sports and lavish balls entertained both tourists and local revelers. However, the night before the mock war at the Ice Castle, there was a serious problem. Ambrose, the guard, was having a terrible time. More and more frozen bodies seemed to be appearing in the icy walls of the castle. To make matters worse, the disembodied moaning voices were becoming more frequent. "Respect the dead," he heard echoing through the icy structure as he guarded the fireworks. "Respect the dead," again and again and again. Ambrose was beginning to panic, so he reached for his whiskey flask and drank a large sip. He then lit up his pipe. But he continued hearing the voices. "Respect the dead, respect the dead." He was sure that he could see more and more frozen corpses appearing within the ice. Ambrose guzzled down the rest of his whiskey and began puffing furiously on his pipe. He felt as though he was losing his mind. After finishing the last drop from his flask, Ambrose snapped. He started screaming at the ghosts who were haunting him. "Quit messing with my head," he yelled out. Then he heard it again. "Respect the dead, respect the dead." Ambrose lost it. "Feck the dead, feck the dead," he yelled out. As he kept puffing on his pipe, suddenly he felt as though something had given him a hard push. He went flying into the bundles of fireworks. His pipe spit out in burning ash. Suddenly, Ambrose heard a sizzling sound. He looked over and saw that the embers of his pipe had lit the fuse on one of the fireworks. He scrambled towards it to try and extinguish it, but he was too late. There was a loud explosion and all of the fireworks began going off. As they lit up the night sky, the fireworks also blew apart sections of the castle, reducing them into shards of ice. Sadly, Ambrose was soon discovered by his colleagues lying among the ice shards. He had suffered severe burns to his body and was rambling about what had happened in a semi-coherent manner. While the surgeons tried their best to help him, Ambrose passed away shortly after the explosion in the ice castle. The authorities tried to hush it up, but the damage was done. In addition to the firework stock explosion and tragic death of Ambrose, Montreal's Winter Carnival was seen as having become too commercial. Its original authenticity just wasn't there anymore. The party was over. Montreal has not hosted a winter carnival since. The only reminder of these remarkable times is found within the city's architecture. In neighborhoods such as Plateau, the Latin Quarter and Gay Village, and the old Faubourg, Quebec, one needs only to look up to observe the ice castle architecture adorning many of the older buildings. The Victorian era ended on January 22, 1901, with the death of the monarch. With her passing, Victorian traditions began to fade across the British Empire, including in Montreal. Not only was the Montreal Winter Carnival deemed a relic of the past, but with the advent of radio, silent films, and eventually television and modern movies, the telling of Christmas ghost stories began to fade as well. It wasn't long before Montreal entirely lost its Victorian traditions in the winter. Today, Montreal is not unremarkable in its winter activities, with events such as Igloo Fest and Nuit Blanche, but they still do not quite compare to the carnival and ice castles of past eras. Yet, one feature still remains. As a city shrouded in the darkness of winter for almost half of the year, it's not surprising that many of our ghosts appear at this time. Are you a Montreal resident or perhaps a tourist who has a spooky holiday tale to share? If so, we'd love to know. As always, we want to hear your theories about what could be going on. Thank you so much for stopping by. If it's your first video, we do hope you'll stick around for the next one. We post new videos in both French and English every second Saturday. If you'd like to learn more about the organization founded by the talented Donovan King, it's all listed in the description down below, along with links to in-person haunted storytelling tours. Remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. We'll have a new video out in a couple weeks, but until then, stay spooky.